I was standing there, draped in shame and mourning. My husband, Robert, was dead, but the secret in my pocket buzzed. Don't cry. I'm not dead. I could barely breathe. The thing that silenced my soul was when I saw who sent me the text. It wasn't Robert. It was the most unexpected betrayal. And what I uncovered next left everyone speechless. Before we continue, please like this video and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know how far our reports reach. Thank you. I'm Elizabeth and I just turned 53, too young, too rich, and certainly too bitter to be a widow. Robert, my husband of 30 years, was a titan in commercial real estate, a man whose presence filled every room he entered. Even this one, where he supposedly lay in a mahogany casket. Except for one glaring detail. The casket was sealed. They said it was a construction accident. Something involving a collapsed scaffolding and a devastating injury. Too gruesome, they insisted, for public viewing. But I knew Robert. He wasn't clumsy. He was meticulous. And the sealed casket felt less like respect for the deceased and more like a necessary cover-up. The air in the chapel was thick with expensive perfume and counterfeit grief. I had to play the part, the grieving widow, eyes glistening with the tears that wouldn't quite fall. My children, James and Charlotte, stood beside me, their faces models of controlled sadness. James, my son, 28, a mirror image of Robert in his ambition, kept checking his watch, a nervous twitch I hadn't seen before. Charlotte, 30, my sharp-witted daughter, usually the emotional bedrock of the family, was too quiet, her eyes darting between me and Mr. Peterson, our family lawyer, who stood rigidly near the altar. There was an unsettling rush to this whole affair, a corporate efficiency applied to death that felt deeply wrong. "Mother, we should move along," James murmured, his voice low, pulling my arm. "The burial slot is tight." "Tight, James?" "It's your father," I remember saying, my voice flat. "We can afford another 15 minutes of sorrow." He ignored the sarcasm, his jaw clenching. He and Charlotte had organized everything in 3 days flat. The venue, the catering, the impossible-to-get mahogany coffin. It was too fast, too clean. It felt like they were disposing of evidence, not honoring a life. That's when my phone vibrated in the silk lining of my morning dress. I almost dismissed it, a condolence message, probably, but something compelled me to slip my hand into my pocket. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. The text was short, brutally simple, and instantly vaporized the last shred of my composure. "I'm not dead." My heart hammered against my ribs. Trolling. It had to be a sick joke. Someone had heard the news and was playing a cruel trick. I scanned the room, looking for a smirk, a flash of recognition. That's when my eyes locked onto her. Standing in the back, near the entrance, was Victoria, Robert's longtime personal assistant. She was a quiet woman, always efficient, always in black, but today, she wasn't just wearing black. She looked terrified. Her hands were clasped, so tight her knuckles were white. Her eyes, usually so neutral, held a desperate plea. I watched her. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Victoria pulled her phone away from her side, held it steady, and then raised her left hand, brushing her cheek in a movement that was definitely not a gesture of sorrow. It was a prearranged signal. A signal Robert and I had used during tense business negotiations when he wanted me to know something was wrong but couldn't speak. Victoria sent it. She sent the text. The shock of the message had been intense, but the realization that my husband's loyal employee was communicating a secret during his funeral, that was the ultimate betrayal of the moment. It meant everything I was seeing was a lie. The grief, the casket, the children's strange rush. I didn't care about the burial slot anymore. I didn't care about the polite condolences. I cared about the truth behind the polished wood. "I need air," I whispered to James, pulling my arm free. I didn't wait for his reply. I walked straight out, past the floral arrangements and the stunned mourners. Victoria was already gone. I didn't even stop to look back at the expensive coffin. I had to know what she knew. I had to know where my dead husband was. The cemetery air hit me like a cold slap. I didn't stop until I found Victoria's discreet black sedan parked 2 rows down from the main entrance. She was already inside, waiting, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they looked frozen. I yanked the passenger door open and slid in, the scent of expensive leather and fear filling the small space. "Whoa, Elizabeth, I didn't think you'd actually follow me," Victoria gasped, her face pale. "I'm not dead" is a pretty compelling invitation to follow, Victoria. I shot back, my voice barely a tremor despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Who the hell are you working for? Robert? Or someone else?" She took a shaky breath. "Robert. Always Robert. Look, I'm so sorry about the funeral. That wasn't supposed to happen." "What wasn't supposed to happen? The death? Or the funeral?" "Because one usually follows the other, unless you're telling me my husband is alive?" "Yes, he is. Or he was when he instructed me on the contingency plan." Victoria fumbled in her handbag, her fingers trembling. "He was planning a disappearance, Elizabeth. Not a funeral. A clean break, 6 months on a remote island while things cooled down." "Cooled down from what?" I demanded. She avoided the question, pushing a thick, cream-colored envelope into my hand. "He said if I ever had to send that text, it meant the plan was compromised. That something had gone horribly, horribly wrong, and that I was to give you this immediately. No questions asked, no looking back." I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single key, heavy, embossed with the logo of the Swiss Commerce Bank in downtown Manhattan, and a small, folded note written in Robert's unmistakable, sharp script. It contained only one word, underlined twice: cipher. "What does it mean, Victoria? What about James and Charlotte? And that ghoul, Mr. Peterson? They look like they were selling used cars at the graveside. They wanted that ceremony over faster than a closing deal." I pressed her, my voice rising in volume. Victoria's facade crumbled. Tears finally streamed down her face, real, non-performative tears. "I don't know. I swear I don't. Robert told me he needed to disappear because of things. Financial secrets. He said if anyone tried to turn his disappearance into a death, it meant they had found him and were trying to betray him. And you think James and Charlotte did that?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I just know they and Mr. Peterson were suddenly very involved. Very rushed. They changed the funeral home. They insisted on the sealed casket, and they froze my access to Robert's accounts instantly. That was the moment I knew. I had to send the signal." The key felt heavy and cold in my palm. A Swiss bank safe, a one-word note, and a frantic assistant. Robert had clearly been running from something far more terrifying than I realized. And now I was running too, abandoning his supposed burial, my silk dress suddenly feeling less like mourning attire and more like a costume in a bad play. "What do you know about Peterson, Victoria? He looked like he owned the entire funeral." She shuddered, glancing nervously towards the main road. "He's always been Robert's cleanup man. But recently, he's been working exclusively with James and Charlotte. He's been asking about your signature, Elizabeth, and the power of attorney paperwork from years ago." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "The kids, they know more than I do. They're capable of more than you think. Stay away from the safe. It's a trap." Her words struck me cold. A trap. Not set by Robert, but by our own children. I looked back at the procession heading to the grave, feeling a sudden, deep humiliation. They were putting an empty box in the ground, and they wanted me to be implicated in whatever lay inside. I pocketed the key and the note. "Thank you, Victoria. Go home. If they ask, you never saw me." I slipped out of the car, my mind racing. The trap had been set. Now I just needed to find the bait. I didn't go back to the cemetery. I didn't go back to the reception. I took a cab straight home, sneaking in through the side entrance like a burglar in my own life. I felt like a ghost, an unwelcome specter in the lavish home Robert had built for us, a home that was suddenly too big, too silent, and entirely too full of potential threats. I saw the whole scene unfold through the crack in the mahogany study door. James, Charlotte, and Mr. Peterson, the unholy trinity, hunched over Robert's desk, a dozen legal documents spread out before them. They were drinking expensive scotch, but the mood was anything but celebratory. "It has to be airtight, Peterson," James insisted, his voice impatient. "We need to accelerate the reading of the will. Get the estate settled before Mother." He trailed off, glancing towards the staircase. Charlotte sipped her drink, looking detached and far too composed. Before Mother grieves? Or before she realizes the casket was underweight? Her cynicism was like ice. The money is secure. Robert's signature on the Cayman account transfer should hold up. Just make sure the final settlement has Elizabeth listed as the sole beneficiary of the debts, not the assets. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. The debt. They were setting me up to inherit the financial mess, while they made off with the hidden $10 million Victoria had hinted at. The reality hit me. Robert's disappearance wasn't the problem. It was the catalyst for my children's betrayal. They weren't just stealing their father's money. They were actively plotting to destroy their mother. I had been expelled from my own family narrative. I spent the rest of the evening silently pacing the hallway outside the study, listening to the murmurs about asset liquidation and legal insulation. My marriage to Robert had been a cold exchange, my social grace for his ambition and wealth. We had a pact: stay together, uphold the image, and our children would inherit everything. Now, the children were upholding nothing but their own greed. I knew I had to act immediately on the cipher note. The safe trap or not was my only lead. I needed to understand what Robert meant. I decided to start my investigation in the one place they hadn't touched yet, the hidden compartment behind Robert's framed law degree. I waited until 2 a.m., when the liquor had finally done its work and the three vultures had stumbled to their respective wings of the house. The compartment was empty, save for dust. I sighed, running my hand along the velvet lining. He was smarter than that. Robert always had a plan B. I started searching the office, inch by inch, pulling out drawers, checking under rugs, feeling increasingly desperate. It was when I was about to give up, sinking down into Robert's massive leather chair, that I noticed it. Tucked underneath the heavy, ornate pedestal of the desk, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a tiny, rectangular device. It was a digital recorder, no bigger than a stick of gum, and the little LED light on the side was on, flashing slowly, silently. I knew instantly it wasn't mine. Robert was old school. He used handwritten ledgers and voice memos, not tiny, spy-grade recording equipment. Who put it there? And why was it still recording? My heart jumped, not in fear, but in sudden, electrifying awareness. If this device was theirs, it might hold the key to the entire grotesque performance. I snatched it up, my hands shaking, and silently retreated to my bedroom. The safe could wait. This little black box held the words. The light on the recorder continued to flash its smug little rhythm in the dark of my closet. I was crouched on the floor, the phone in my hand, preparing to transfer the audio. I felt a dreadful premonition, a cold dread far worse than the fake grief I'd put on earlier. I wasn't listening for Robert's confession. I was listening for my children's betrayal. The first minutes were silence, then the low rumble of voices. It was the previous night's meeting: James, Charlotte, and Peterson. James, muffled, agitated. I don't care how you spin it. It was supposed to be a disappearance, not a sealed casket funeral. Now the IRS is going to be crawling all over us. Charlotte, calm, chilling, relaxed James. The sealed casket was Peterson's idea. It's cleaner. No body, no questions about identification, and Mother plays the victim. It gets us the full $10 million from the offshore bond, which was the goal. The dollar amount, stated so casually, felt like a physical blow. $10 million. The price of their father's life, or at least his freedom. James. But the timing, we had to move faster than we planned. I told you, he almost slipped out of the country. Charlotte. He wasn't going to get away with leaving us with the wreckage of his legitimate businesses. That debt alone would crush Mother, which, frankly, simplifies things. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to cry. These were the children I raised. I had sacrificed my own career, my own identity, to give them everything. And this was their dividend, planning my financial ruin. I was the widow who would inherit the shame and the debt, while they danced with the hidden wealth. The recording continued, focusing on the finer points of the scheme. They discussed the documents Robert had been forced to sign, the fake death certificate, and how Peterson had handled the bank. Peterson's smooth, arrogant, "the bank is covered." We have a falsified power of attorney document dating back 5 years. If anyone asks about the Cayman transfer, we simply state Robert handled it himself, pre-death, in anticipation of liquidation. The only person who might complicate things is Elizabeth. She has the key to Robert's personal safety deposit box. James, eager, is there anything in that box? Peterson, it's a decoy. Robert set it up years ago. But Elizabeth believes it's important. She will go there, and she will find the withdrawal proof. That act, touching that proof after his death, will make her an accessory to his presumed fraud. We have eyes on the box. When she opens it, we alert the authorities anonymously. I gasped. The sheer, cold-blooded efficiency of it. Victoria had warned me, but hearing it articulated by my own children, sealed by my lawyer, was a different kind of horror. The trap wasn't just financial. It was a legal snare designed to land me in federal prison while they watched from the comfort of my old life. Charlotte. So the timeline is funeral, probate, mother gets arrested for fraud, and we collect the money. Peterson chuckles, his voice dangerously close to the recorder. The plan is simple. When she opens the safe, the blame will fall on her. I ripped the headphones off, my entire body shaking. They weren't just stealing. They were executing a complete character assassination. I had to assume the bank was already compromised. I couldn't trust the police. I couldn't trust anyone. The digital recorder, their evidence, was now mine. But the trap was already sprung. I had to get to the bank, not to find the evidence, but to beat their timeline. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't even mourn the loss of my children, who had become monsters overnight. I simply changed out of my funeral attire into a dark suit and drove downtown before sunrise. The Swiss Commerce Bank was an imposing granite fortress, a fitting backdrop for the drama unfolding. The manager, a tight-lipped woman, looked uncomfortable as I presented Robert's paperwork and the key. My hands were clammy, the heavy key a burning weight in my palm. The entire world felt like it was closing in, my children watching, Peterson pulling the legal strings, and Robert somewhere, playing the victim. She led me down to the vault. The air here was even colder than the study. After the necessary protocol, the attendant slid Robert's safety deposit box across the counter. My heart hammered against the granite. This was it. The trap. I opened the lid. It was almost empty. Inside, there was a single folded piece of paper, the promised bait. It was a receipt, a wire transfer confirmation for exactly $10 million to an entity called Ares Holdings, safe in the Cayman Islands. The date stamped on the receipt was Tuesday, the day after Robert's supposed accident and death. The paper wasn't meant to implicate Robert. It was meant to implicate the person holding it. Me. The widow caught moving millions out of the country after her husband's death. I stared at the receipt, trying to memorize every number, every detail. Mrs. Sterling? The manager was suddenly standing beside me, her voice now sharp and professional. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the contents of that box. I looked up. 2 security guards were positioned near the entrance to the vault area. The manager held a phone, her thumb hovering over the dial pad. What is the meaning of this? I demanded, standing up, clung the receipt and the cipher note in my hand. We received an anonymous tip regarding unauthorized access and suspicious activity concerning this specific box, she stated flatly, not meeting my gaze. The police have been contacted. My old life of comfort and decorum vanished. I was no longer Elizabeth Sterling, the grieving widow. I was a target. My own children had pulled the trigger. Instinct took over, fueled by the memory of Charlotte's cold voice and Peterson's mocking chuckle. I had to get out. I pushed past the manager, throwing my handbag at the nearest security guard. It wasn't a noble action. It was the raw, primal urge of a mother fighting for survival. I ran, out of the vault, up the marble stairs, and burst into the sunny, busy street. I hailed a cab, shaking, my mind replaying Peterson's words. The blame will fall on her. I spent 2 hours driving aimlessly, finally instructing the driver to drop me a block away from my own house. I had to retrieve the recording device, my only real defense. But as I rounded the corner, I saw the telltale black and white of a police cruiser parked right outside the wrought iron gate. They were there. They were waiting. My breath hitched. They hadn't just reported the bank activity. They had secured a search warrant. James and Charlotte hadn't wasted a minute. I felt a surge of cold, hot fury. I couldn't walk into a police ambush. I looked at the vast grounds of the estate, the thick foliage lining the perimeter. I was an intruder in my own home, and I had to find a way in without being seen. I had to get to the study, get the recorder, and find a place to hide before they found the proof that incriminated me. I used the old groundskeeper's access point, a small, hidden gate in the back hedge that Robert always forgot to oil. I slipped through the grounds, keeping low, the smell of freshly cut grass heavy in the afternoon heat. The irony was suffocating, navigating my own prize-winning gardens like a fugitive. The police cruiser was still parked in front, but there was no sign of officers. They must have been inside searching. I knew exactly where they'd look first. My bedroom, Robert's closet, and the safe hidden behind the painting. I had maybe 10 minutes before they hit the study. I entered through the kitchen, a room where I'd spent 30 years supervising caterers, now a zone of risk. I crept through the dining room, my heart pounding, until I reached the door to Robert's study. It was ajar. Inside, I didn't find the police. I found James, Charlotte, and Mr. Peterson, their faces flushed with panic. James was frantically stuffing papers into a briefcase. Charlotte was standing guard, her eyes fixed on the door. "Where is it? Where's the recorder?" I demanded, closing the door and locking it behind me. They froze, turning to stare at me as if I were a true ghost. "Mother? How did you?" James stammered. "Don't, James. Don't insult my intelligence. The bank, the cop car, the $10 million receipt. You made me walk right into your trap, but I got out. Now tell me the truth. Where is Robert?" I held up the cipher note and the receipt. "And what did you do with the body in that empty box?" Charlotte recovered first, her face hardening into a terrifying mask of indifference. "You were always going to be the sacrificial lamb, Mother. You sign off on the debt, we take the assets." It was clean. "A sacrificial lamb implicated in a $10 million fraud," I corrected, my voice dangerously level. "I have the evidence you left here." I pulled out the small recorder. James saw the little black device and his face went white with pure animal fury. That was our insurance. We were going to use it against Peterson if he double-crossed us." "Well, now it's my insurance," I said, my voice shaking with cold rage. "You used your father's near death to set up your mother. You have expelled me from my life." Peterson finally spoke, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's a moot point, Elizabeth. Even if you have the recording, we have the signed affidavits from Robert transferring the assets. You have a receipt that places you at the scene of the fraud. Who do you think the judge will believe?" "I think the judge will believe me when I expose that my dead husband is actually your hostage," I stated. This broke James. He flew into a rage, knocking over a heavy lamp. He was never supposed to be a hostage. He was supposed to be gone. Out of the picture. We were just going to take the money and tell you he ran off. But he was too clever. He was watching us. He almost got away. He took a deep, ragged breath, his eyes blazing with hatred and desperation. "Que você quem vai ao sombra me?" Robert estava nos observando de longe. Mas agora está in a place where he'll never sign anything again. James's threat hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Charlotte looked at her brother, her composure finally shattering into sheer terror. Peterson, however, remained unervingly still, his eyes fixed on the study door. He knew the police were close. The loud, insistent ring of the front doorbell echoed through the house, followed by the distant but clear sound of authority. "Police. Open up." Peterson grabbed his briefcase, his professional calm returning. "Showtime, children. Stick to the script. She broke into the bank. She's delusional." "No," I shouted, holding up the recorder. "I have the evidence of your collusion. I'm calling the FBI. I'll expose the entire scheme, including whatever Robert did." "Do it, Elizabeth," Charlotte said, regaining her cold control, her eyes like chips of flint. "And the FBI will ask where Robert is. And we'll tell them." What happens to you then? You can't threaten me anymore. I know you faked the funeral. I know the casket is empty. Charlotte actually smiled. A terrifying, humorless expression. The casket is empty because Robert isn't dead. Not yet, anyway. I froze. The words hit me like a physical blow, worse than James's rage. It confirmed the terrifying implication of the recording. He was planning to disappear, Charlotte explained quickly, talking to Peterson but clearly wanting me to hear. We found him at the airport 2 days ago. He thought he was so clever. He transferred everything to offshore bonds, leaving us with nothing but liabilities. So you took him, I whispered, the nausea returning. We secured him, James corrected, his voice a snarl. Peterson got him to sign a final set of papers, relinquishing all claim to the Cayman accounts. We gave him a timeout in a remote property until the estate clears probate. The funeral was just to ensure that legally, he was done. No one can ever question his signature again. The police were now hammering on the door, their voices muffled but stern. Peterson gave a sharp nod to the children. It's time. Find a way to keep her quiet. I ducked behind the curtain, adrenaline blinding me. They couldn't find me here. I was out of options. I was trapped between my murderous children and the law they had weaponized against me. Charlotte, to James as she moves to the door, make sure the cabana is secure. And make sure he understands what's next. We can't let him send any more of those cryptic messages. James, I'm heading there now. He won't be a problem much longer. I listened, my body tense, as Charlotte opened the door to the police. I heard the calm, authoritative voices of the officers and Charlotte's dramatic, tearful performance about her distraught, unstable mother who had fled a mental break. Then I heard Peterson's voice, calm and deadly, speaking to the officers about the missing key and the bank report. He started describing my appearance, my desperation. And then he lowered his voice, speaking in a conspiratorial tone that was too close to my hiding spot. She probably hid in one of the places she always thought was secret, Peterson advised the officers. He looked right at the curtain where I stood, a tiny knowing glint in his eye. Search the master bedroom. I'm sure she kept the evidence that incriminates herself. Peterson's gaze felt like a laser beam boring through the velvet curtain. I held my breath, clutching the recorder and the transfer receipt. I could hear the heavy steps of the officers moving toward the main wing of the house. I had to assume that Peterson's look meant he knew I was near. He was taunting me. With the police distracted, I slipped out of the study and ran, not up to the master bedroom where they would be, but down to the rarely used wine cellar. It was a dusty, cold place, a tomb of vintage bottles, and the only spot in the house with poor cell service. As soon as I had a single flickering bar, I dialed the only number I had left, Victoria. I had burned every other bridge. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with panic. Elizabeth, are you okay? The news is everywhere. They're saying you had a breakdown. It's a lie, Victoria. They set me up. They sent the police. They knew I'd go to the bank. My voice was a desperate, pleading whisper. They told me everything. James and Charlotte took Robert. They have him locked up. The funeral was just a cover. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear her sharp, ragged inhale. Oh God. I knew it. She finally breathed. That's why he made me promise. He knew they'd try to do more than just steal his money. You said he had a contingency plan. I implore you, Victoria. I am running from the police and my own children. What did he leave me? What is the cipher? The cipher? It's a double code. The word cipher is the key to a second, deeply encrypted folder on his personal laptop. But the key to that is the date of the first business trip he ever took you on. Do you remember it? I paused, flashing back to a trip to London 25 years ago. The excitement, the ambition. July 14th, 1999. The Savoy. Good. Now listen carefully. Robert was paranoid. He was also meticulous. He knew Mr. Peterson was a danger, but not just to him. Peterson has a secret. He used to work for a major firm that was indicted for money laundering 2 decades ago. Robert had a file insurance, with all the proof of Peterson's direct involvement. My mind started working again, cold and sharp. This wasn't about Robert's money anymore. This was about Peterson's career and freedom. I could turn the tables. I could make Peterson an ally, or an enemy too terrified to move. Where's that file, Victoria? It's on a flash drive. He stored it at the one place he knew you'd never go near, the old cafe we used to meet at for business lunches when you were convinced we were having an affair. She sounded genuinely ashamed. Just give me the address, Victoria. I don't care about your past. I need to save Robert. It's 4208 Pinecrest Alley. Look for a dusty, broken jukebox. He left the drive taped underneath it. Her voice was frantic now. Elizabeth, be careful. If James and Charlotte are escalating, Robert is in danger. They're capable of anything now that they've tasted that rich freedom. I knew she was right. They had already buried their father. The next step was easy. I had to go from a fugitive widow to a detective armed with a lawyer's dirty secrets. I need his location, Victoria. She hesitated, then rushed the words out. It's on the flash drive, too. He called it the sanctuary. Please, Elizabeth, you have to find him. I'm afraid they'll kill him. She took a breath. Go now. Before it's too late. I fled the house before the police finished their sweep of the master bedroom, the sounds of my own destruction echoing behind me. I drove the old pickup truck Robert kept hidden in the auxiliary garage, a deliberate piece of paranoia that finally paid off. 4208 Pinecrest Alley was exactly as I imagined, a derelict cafe, smelling of stale coffee and lost hope. The windows were boarded up, but the service entrance was ajar. Robert's doing, no doubt. Inside, the place was dark and dusty. I found the broken-down jukebox, its veneer peeling like sunburnt skin. I knelt down, running my hand along the cool metal casing. My fingers hit something small and hard, a thin flash drive, taped securely beneath the machine. Back in the truck, I plugged the drive into the laptop Robert had instructed Victoria to give me months ago. It was hidden under the floorboards in the truck's cargo bay. I typed in the password, which, of course, was my birthday. The drive opened, revealing 2 folders, Peterson Insurance and The Sanctuary. I clicked on The Sanctuary. It contained a single video file labeled, chillingly, "If I don't make it." I pressed play. Robert's face, haggard and tired, filled the screen. He was thinner than I remembered, his eyes haunted. "If you're watching this, Elizabeth, I failed," he began, his voice surprisingly soft. "I'm sorry for the shame, for the secrecy, for everything." He went on to explain his financial predicament. The legitimate business was about to go bankrupt, and it was going to drag our entire fortune and legacy down with it. He had created the offshore bond years ago, not to run away with another woman, but to save the family name. The disappearance was meant to buy time for the bond to mature safely, allowing us to restart under a new identity. "I realized the children weren't ready for this kind of sacrifice," he confessed. "They didn't see the future. They just saw the money. I know they've been tracking me. I know they'll turn my disappearance into my death to accelerate the payout. I always knew James and Charlotte were greedy, but not this." He looked directly into the camera, and I felt a pang of genuine sorrow for the first time since the funeral. "There is another account, Elizabeth. The real emergency fund. The key is in that word, cipher. The password is the full Roman numeral translation of our wedding anniversary date, minus the last digit. It will secure your future, no matter what happens to me." He ended the video by giving me the location of the sanctuary, the family's old, dilapidated hunting cabana deep in the Adirondack Mountains. "That's where I told James I'd go if I ever needed to vanish. If I'm not here anymore, they took me there." My finger went to the Peterson Insurance folder. It contained hundreds of emails, bank statements, and legal notes detailing Mr. Peterson's 20-year history of money laundering and tax fraud. It was a complete dossier, enough to send the man away for life. I checked the GPS location of the cabana on my phone. Then a new text message flashed, from James's number. It was a picture, a blurry photo of a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of the woods. The caption was brutal. "Mom, you should have stayed at the bank. We're going to resolve this problem once and for all." They were going to kill him. I slammed the laptop shut. They knew the cabana was the last place he could be. I had the truth, the evidence, and the power to destroy them, but I didn't have much time. I was heading straight into a final confrontation with my own children, who had become literal villains in a dark, desperate attempt to hold onto their undeserved inheritance. The drive to the Adirondacks was a blur of speed and adrenaline. I wasn't Elizabeth Sterling anymore. I was a woman fueled by fury and the need for justice, even if that justice was perverse. I didn't go to the police. I went straight to the source of the rot, Mr. Peterson. While speeding down the highway, I sent him an encrypted email with 2 attachments, a snippet of the recording confirming his collusion with James and Charlotte, and the full Peterson insurance file. My message was short: you have 10 minutes to ensure Robert is safe and unharmed at the hunting cabana. If anything happens to him, the full dossier goes to the DOJ. I own you, Peterson. You work for me now. When I reached the cabana, the door was unlocked. I burst inside, finding Robert, gaunt and shackled to a wooden chair. He looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief. Elizabeth? You shouldn't be here. Don't worry, darling, I said, my voice heavy with irony. I'm the woman who paid for this shack, and now I've come to collect the inventory. I had barely freed him when the headlights of Charlotte's SUV cut through the windows. James and Charlotte walked in, their faces tight with shock. Mother. How did you? Charlotte started, reaching for her phone. Don't bother, I cut her off, holding up my own phone. Mr. Peterson is now taking his instructions from me. He knows about the money laundering, James. He knows about the recordings. He knows about everything. And he has a very high incentive to keep your father alive, safe and silent. Robert, now standing beside me, looked at his children, the sheer unadulterated cruelty in their eyes, and his shoulders slumped. The moment he saw their willingness to imprison and potentially execute him, he lost the last shred of paternal love. The final confrontation was less a brawl and more a cold, corporate negotiation. I presented the terms, not of surrender, but of emancipation. You tried to frame me for fraud, I told them, my voice steel. You kidnapped your father. The police are looking for me, but a single anonymous call with the right evidence will land both of you in prison for decades. This is my deal. I give you silence, and you give me Robert's freedom. Charlotte, the calculator, understood instantly. And what do you want? An irrevocable, legally binding renunciation of every penny of the Sterling estate, including all current and future assets, I stated, pulling out the documents I'd prepared on the drive. You get nothing. You walk away with the clothes on your back, and you never speak Robert Sterling's name again. In exchange, I keep the secret of your father's survival and your criminal plot. James raged, but Charlotte signed first. She had a cold, clear eye for self-preservation. James, defeated, finally followed suit. Within 48 hours, Robert and I, utilizing the secret account he had set up and the leverage I held over Peterson, were gone. The case against missing Elizabeth Sterling was quietly dissolved with a few perfectly placed threats from our newly compliant lawyer. We moved to a quiet, beautiful corner of Europe. New names, new life. The rich life we had fought for. I won the war. I defeated my children. I secured the money, and I brought my undead husband back to the land of the living. I'm sitting here now in the afternoon sun, watching Robert sip his tea, seemingly safe. But every time I look at him, I remember that sealed casket and the price of my victory. I saved my husband's life, but I destroyed my family. I look at the man who was willing to run away from us all, and I think of the cold, calculated deal I made. I won, but the question remains, heavy and persistent, hanging over every moment of this new, quiet life. I saved my husband, or bought him back.